My name's Mike Ellis. I have a problem. I rescue, refurbish, restore and revitalise vintage drums, in particular Premier drums. In this programme I'll share with you my adventures, ups and downs, ins and outs, triumphs and tragedies as I lavish some TLC on vintage British drums. Welcome to the Drum Fettler.
You will remember, as if you could forget, in the last edition of the Drum Fettler, I was in mortal combat with a 1974 Premier 2000 snare drum, and one tension rod was, and still is, giving me a bit of jip, inasmuch that it won't come out. The drum has been stored in less than perfect conditions, quite damp I imagine, and the rod has become quite firmly jammed in. Now, as I said, I didn't want to force it with the big screwdriver because I feared breaking the top off the tension rod. So, how am I going to deal with this? Well, I shall show you. This is the offending rod, firmly jammed in. You will recall I managed to get the resonance side off, which is a good thing because that means I've now got access to the lug mount. And what I'm basically going to do, very quite simply, is take the lug off, or unscrew it from the shell, so it is free. So take that screw out, put that safely in there, push that, et voila! Now, it's not ideal, but it's better than it was because we have now got the oop off, and now it's a case of trying to persuade the swivel nut to part company with the tension rod without damaging either of them. It's not the end of the world if I do. Worst case scenario is I'll have to cut through the tension rod and replace it and discard the rod and the swivel nut and the insert plate, which I don't like doing because, as you know, I don't like throwing anything away, and obviously these parts are no longer made, so we really don't want to be throwing them away if we can possibly help it. Now, this looks a bit brutal, but desperate situations call for desperate measures. I put the top of the rod in a vise, and what I'm doing is an old engineering trick that I turned. When you've got something like this where it's a stuck thread, obviously it's been slathered in the old WD-40, and it very often, the first thing you want to do is you want to try and force it to undo, lefty-loosey. Well, one of the things I've learned is if you go righty-tighty a little bit and then go the other way, sometimes it frees it up. However, in this situation it is just not, it's not bloody having it. It's defeated me and the mole grips, which means I can give them back to the mole. I'm not going to waste any more time trying to sort this out, so I'm just going to cut that off, get the old angle grinder out and replace them. Right, well, that's done the trick. Harsh but fair, I think. So we've got the rod out and the other bit with the swivel nut and the insert plate has it's disappeared off into the other dimension where things go when they fall on the floor, obviously until I tread on it. Right, next up I think we'll take the lugs off the shell. Now we need to get the outer casts off from the flow beam mechanism, have a look inside and see how the inner casts are getting on. Well, the butt end is a new inner cast, and I know this not only because it looks new, but if you remember when we talked before about the flow beam, the terminal has got flat sides, which means it's metric, so it means it's newer. This is the old version with the slanted side. So that's okay. Let's see what the lever side has to say for itself. The lever side is in a rather sorry state. It's split and it is hunched over, so that will need replacing. Now that's the older one, so I'm thinking really need to get, rather than replacing with an old BSF threaded one, replace it with the new metric so it matches. Yep, I think that's what I'm going to do. Let's see what sort of state the leaf springs are in. Another little tip for you: whenever you take the flow beam outer casts off, you need to remove the fulcrum pin, which is a little thread underneath the collar. Do not lose this. Do not lose it, because you will never get a replacement without buying an entire flow beam assembly. So screw it back into the casting so you know where it is and it can't go missing. Right, now we've got the screws out, we can pull the cover back and just have a quick look at the leaf springs, remembering to hold the cover out of the way. To get the leaf springs out, you need one of these, the patented Bunham Drums leaf spring extractorizer. Basically, snipe nose pliers, little angle in them, and you will see how much easier it is to get them out rather than using normal snipe nose pliers, but obviously they will still work, but these are better. Well, as you can see, the leaf springs on one side are quite badly distorted. They weren't springy enough to hold the little plastic thing in place, which means that every time you hit the drum, the snares would drop off. So either these will be bent back into shape, which can be done, or we can replace them with new ones, depending on availability. But I think we're going to replace them with new ones, do the job properly. Let's have a look at the other side. Leaf springs on the other side are also distorted. Well, one of them is, the other one is not in particularly bad shape. So that's 3 of the 4 leaf springs not in the shape they should be. We've diagnosed quite a few things, we just need to get the parts. We need new leaf springs, at least 1 new inner cast, new snare wires, a new tension rod, insert plate and swivel nut. We'll come back to the 2000 snare in a little while. we're back to the Beverly, and these are the hoops for the bass drum. All dried now, sprayed and lacquered and looking fabulous. There we go. We move on now, I think, to fitting the spurs. For the fitting of the spurs to the bass drum, you will recall it originally had the 298 folding spurs, but I've decided to go a little more retro and go with the 297 disappearing spurs, but not the lever spring version, the one with the wing bolts, and they will be these. As you can see, black to go with the hoops, and they've got a wing nut to hold the spurs in place. And the other good thing is these will take 10.5mm spurs, which are a bit more substantial, so things should be quite secure. To get the spurs in the right place, I have made a little template here, and this was from a Premier kit that I had in here. It shows position of the mount holes, it shows the oval hull, and it also goes right up to the head. Well, it doesn't go up to the head, it actually goes to the inside of the reinforcement ring. So what I need to do is this. This is the hole from the 39235 mount that I've kept. That is where the other one was, which is now filled. So what we do is we take the template, we line up the hole for the 297 mount, make sure that it's up straight with the reinforcement ring, and then we make a little mark there. What I'm also going to do is I'm just going to poke through, so that will show the top and bottom of the oval hole for the spur to go through. Then I can drill through here and then tidy up the bit in the middle. At least that's the theory, and it should all go swimmingly well. I mean, really, how hard can it be? What could possibly go wrong? Just had a little dry run, got the mount on. Now I don't have the 10.5mm spurs with me, but I do have a 10.5mm tom-tom arm, so just to see if this fits, which it does. Brilliant. And there we are. Nice and tight. It's nice and firm. We like things tight. We like things firm. By Jove, I should say so. Excellent. Right. That's just what we wanted. All I have to do now is do the other side. There we are, that's the other side done. Just tidying up. We've drilled all the holes we need to drill. We've filled all the holes we need to fill. Next, the wrap. So the next big thing for this drum will be sharp pointy things and cutting shiny bits of wrap. So I'll see you in a little while. Deans & Son was established in 1905 and were expert metal fabricators. Their chroming and casting skills were employed in manufacturing not only music stands but also drum consoles in the 1920s for Premier, Carlton and Ajax. By the mid-1930s they were making and marketing their own Beverly range of drums. In 1958 the owner wanted to retire, so he sold the company to the founder and chairman of Premier, Albert Della Porta. There are a lot of misconceptions about the Premier-Beverly relationship. It seems to be generally believed that Premier bought and owned Beverly. However, this was not the case. Albert Della Porta bought Beverly privately. Beverly paid Premier for making the drums, and the two companies were kept quite separate. When Albert died, the ownership of Beverly transferred to his brother, Fred, who was the managing director of Premier. Fred did not like Beverly because he thought it was hurting Premier sales in the USA. This was probably true because the Beverly range really did do exceptionally well in the States in the early 60s. After Albert died, Fred disposed of Beverly to London brass instrument specialist Boozy & Hawkes, who, up until that time, were the manufacturers of Ajax and Edgware drums, for them to handle the marketing. Premier supplied Beverly drums to B&H, who badged and distributed them as their own line of drums until 1979, when B&H exited the drum market.
Beverley drums did make it across the pond in the 60s, but in the 70s the B&H version was marketed as the Premier 6000 series. All through production from the early 60s the drums were made from the same shells as the Premier and Olympic lines, and shared many of the features of the top line Premiers. By the mid-70s they were unjustly regarded as cheap in their homeland and never really achieved a good market share in the UK, but they did very well on exports. There was a range of Far Eastern Beverley drums, but they had no connection or lineage with the original company.
As is the way with so many of Premier's lovely 2000 snare drums that are made of aluminium from the early 70s, this one is pitted. There's not a lot you can do about it really, you just have to accept it as part of its aging process and its patina, but we can make some attempt to clean it up a little bit. The only realistic way to get rid of pitting on something like this is to have it stripped down completely and re-chromed, if you can find a plater that will do it, because they know, as well as many people do, that chrome and aluminium don't like each other very much and don't stay together. Now that's not to say that you will never find an aluminium 2000 with no pitting. There are some out there that have been really well looked after, so you might find one day. We shall give this a bit of a clean and see how it comes up. Yellow wrap for the Beverly bass drum. The plan is this. We have one big piece which will go all the way around and meet nearly at the bottom, but not quite. So it's luckily, as you remember, the piece that I've got will go from one set of lugs at the bottom all the way around to the next set of lugs, leaving a little space in the middle. So with this bit, which just so happens to be almost the right size, just needs cutting to size, I'm going to put that in place first before I put the big piece on. So let's get to it. Straightened up that edge because it was a bit manky. Perfect. Right, we need to get that glued on. That's glue on. We'll put some on the shell. We'll put some on the infill wrap. Now we're just going to let that go off, go tacky, then we'll attach it and we will return to the Beverly bass drum later. We can start to think about cleaning this up. You can't really do anything about this pitting, but we can give the shell a polish so at least it's a little bit shinier. But the other thing to watch out for is just to check the bearing edges. Make sure there is no pitting on the bearing edges before. If there is pitting, a little bit there, that's coming through. If there's a little bit of pitting on the bearing edges, the chrome will flake off. Chrome is sharp and it will, or it may, but it is as likely as not to damage the head, or worse still, put a little tear in it, and then when you're in the middle of your thunderous drum solo, your snare drum head breaks, and that is quite disastrous. I've seen grown men eat their own knees rather than have a broken snare head. Well, I think this is as successful as we're going to be. It's considerably shinier. It looks a lot better. Obviously, the pitting's still there, but as I say, it's all part of its age and character. So now, let's sort the lugs out. That's the lugs done, polished up and shining. Now the same for the insert plates and swivel nuts. There seems to have been some jiggery and indeed pokery going on with these swivel nuts, because those are the smaller, shorter, medium-sized ones that one might expect to find in a Premier snare drum lug. But some of them have got these longer ones that you get in tom lugs. I think this snare drum might have been fiddled with. Either that or the Premier factory, they just grabbed what was to hand at the time of building. The lugs are on. It's looking a lot nicer now. That's about all we can do for the 2000, because I need to get the new leaf springs, the new inner cast and the new wires. So as soon as they arrive, we will come back to it in a later edition of the Drum Fettler.